Welcome to the wonderful world of your local city library. Here, among the many floors, thousands of pages offer their mysteries and adventures. As you make your way through the floors like magic steps, you will be plunged into a variety of topics, from antiquity to modernity, from science to art. On one of the floors of this literary labyrinth stands the protagonist of our story. With the meticulousness of an archaeologist, she explores the shelves like golden grains of sand in search of the treasure she is destined to find. Her hands gently flip through the pages like a wave of a magic wand. Each book, like a mirror, reflected her desires and interests. "Amazing!" she exclaimed. "This is how you can find out what people were thinking a few hundred years ago?" Her name is Susie. She is 19 years old, and she is a simple college student. While Susie was enjoying flipping through the pages in the book, her phone rang. The girl pulled out her phone and saw that there was an active correspondence in the group she was in with her friends. Opening the correspondence, Susie began to read. What were the girls asking her? One of her friends suggested a meeting. The other girls were supportive, specifying where they would go, and there was a suggestion that they could go to the shopping center. One of them needs to see a new lipstick. Everyone liked the idea very much, but they noticed that Susie wasn't answering anything, so they asked her a question. They offered to go with them, but Susie thought she couldn't. She still had an essay to finish, so she'd have to sit alone in the library. The girls, of course, began to say that she was a real bookworm, and they knew it was useless to call her. But still, she was not upset at all. She loved to read books and read all kinds of works. Reading was like being transported to another world. The only thing that could upset Susie was that she was back to reading a random book instead of researching for essay materials. She was very passionate about reading and could immerse herself in any of the books on a fascinating journey through its history. She was downright frustrated that she couldn't sit down at a given moment to read that book she found, because it was late, and she needed to do essay prep, not read whatever came to hand. Susie climbs the ladder, aiming for the highest shelf where a treasure trove of knowledge lurks. At the top of this mountain of words, Susie encounters ancient tomes and books, covered in a light layer of the dust of time, searching for the perfect literature for her essay. And so, among the ancient volumes and fresh editions, her gaze lingers on one book. The cover beckoned to her like a magnet, and the title page promised to open doors to new corners of knowledge. Susie wondered, what kind of book is this? Pulling this book closer, she read the title, The Mainland of Stars and Moons, The Story of Jingling. Seated on the same staircase, Susie began leafing through this book to realize that it was a mysterious, magical novel, a centuries-old history of an ancient state. It says that Heiress is one of the greatest kings of Jingling. He suppressed the rebellion caused by the deeds of the past monarch overnight. With his fury, he quelled the flames of war and brought the kingdom of Jingling to a glory comparable to the Boer Empire. King, the greatest support among the people and at the same time a harsh dictator, Heiress, nicknamed Reinhardt, the 14th monarch of Jingling, who has many distinguished honors. However, he is known for his hatred of women. During his reign, no woman held a civil or military post. The women's academies established by the rulers of past centuries had faded into oblivion. This Iron Monarch, for various reasons, drove all women out of government, dispersing them to the provinces, leaving them only the option of being keepers of the home. He did not spare even his own children, always favoring only boys, and wished with all his soul to pass the throne exclusively to his son. But the chief concubine was barren, and the palace harem gave birth to 6 girls in succession. By the time the queen gave birth, the abbot predicted that Jingling would be granted an heir, who would lead the country to even greater glory. The whole of Jingling froze and waited in anticipation. Susie was so engrossed in reading this book that she forgot she was on the stairs. The girl accidentally stumbled on the stairs. She couldn't stay on the ladder because she stumbled and flew down the highest shelf. Xinyu Continent is the official residence of King Jingling. For some reason, Susie began to see and hear what the imaginary picture in her head said. It seemed so real to her. Susie saw this king sitting on his throne thinking about something. He had been written about in a book, and he didn't even look good. String Hall. A woman ran in and began to shout, "Your Majesty! The Queen has given birth to them!" Susie wondered very much why she could hear what they were saying. She can't figure out why it happened. She seems to have traveled back in time and ended up in this kingdom, but how? Moon Palace nuclear weapons. And things are starting to take a bad turn. The Queen's room where the baby has just been born, with governesses running around her and helping the woman. It was announced that His Majesties had arrived in the room. The king came in to see the baby. The child's mother said, "Your Majesty, she gave the child the name Susie. Do you think it is suitable?" The main character turned into this baby, and they have the same names. It's probably a coincidence. When the king approached, he looked at this infant with such disdain, as if it were not his child at all. In Wangguan Grand Square, people began to crowd around and discuss something that the queen must have already given birth to. Does anyone know if it is a boy or a girl? One of the people said that he thought it was a little princess. If she inherited the king's beauty, then surely she will be the most beautiful princess in the entire continent. Also, people were talking about how the king has no love for princesses. People began to crowd, gathering in the square, waiting to see who was born, a boy or a girl. Two women were not without gossip that day either. One said, "But he already has 6 daughters." The other woman confirmed that it was true, and the worst thing was that if a princess was born, she had heard that all the concubines who had given birth before had been banished. And then at last, the king appeared. He had a baby in his arms, and the people began to whisper, "Look, it's His Majesty." The king! According to their tradition in this kingdom, the king always brought out his baby and showed it to the people. So the king did so now, bringing out the baby and proclaiming, "People of Jingling, rejoice." The baby with fear peed his pants, and everyone saw that it was a boy, because people began to shout, the heir was born." Everyone began to cheer, congratulating the queen and the king. Everyone was very happy that at last there was an heir, a long-awaited heir, in this kingdom. But alas, far from being a boy, this little gentleman who is being honored by the crowd is not her at all, although everyone calls him the Queen's child. The Queen's child is actually her, lying in her crib with a pacifier in her mouth and looking at the toy suspended above her. A maid ran into the Queen's room and said, "Queen, His Majesty has already announced that she has borne him a son and named the boy Zhaoban." The Queen looked at her little newly born daughter Susie with great pity. She felt very sorry for her. It turned out that the main character had traveled to the Sinuhe continent in the Jingling Kingdom in the world of this book. According to historical records, this King Jinuo is an unimaginably horrible person. For the sake of his desire to have an heir son, he used his younger brother's child, passing him off as the queen's son. And to keep it a secret from the real mother, Zhaobanyo was disposed of by executing her. Everyone who knows the truth is strictly forbidden to divulge it. And now it turns out the protagonist has to go through all these events. It's a bad dream, a nightmare. She asks for someone to pinch her so she'll wake up. In a previous life, her parents had died early, and she wanted more than anything to have a complete family. Maybe her wish to have both parents fulfilled in this life. Maybe she demanded too much. Susie was lying in her crib and fretting about needing to wake up. She saw the king coming toward her bed. She thought, "What is he talking about? That evil man with the eternal stone face." So she was really in this place, and there was nothing she could do about it. The king walked over to the girl's crib, took her literally by the scruff of the neck like a kitten, lifting her up in front of him. He looked down at her and said that the 7th girl was useless. They were all the same, ignorant and fragile. Susie looked at him and thought, well, she swears she certainly didn't ask for a father so rude. Because Susie was small, she was naturally in pain. She cried. The girl thought, didn't he himself when he was born, as if he didn't look frail and ignorant? Did his brains fall off? The king ordered the maids to bring Zhaobang here. When the maid brought the boy, the king said, addressing the queen, according to the abbot's prediction, the child she will bear him will be the heir to the throne of Jingling, and that he will bring his kingdom great glory. The maid approached the queen and gave this baby to her. The king said, "Queen, remember once and for all, this boy is her son and his heir." The woman said, listening, looking at Susie. The king ordered her to be sent to the Tower of Celestials. The Tower of the Gods is a place of sacrifice to the gods. Those who enter it will only die. However, it is said that their souls may be chosen to serve in the heavenly office. Susie, lying in her crib, resented her little baby crying about being sent there. "Why, he's a monster!" The queen threw herself at the king's feet and began to beg for mercy for Susie. She disappointed him, but the little girl was her flesh and blood after all. The queen promised that she would send her away from the palace, and not a soul would know of her origins. The king looked very sternly at the queen. He would not let anyone know that his seventh child was a girl. If he did such a thing to Mother Jiaoban by executing her, and all who know of the true state of affairs are forbidden on pain of death to speak of it. Now Susie had suffered the same fate. But the queen, on her knees, begged him to visit her. And to the great surprise of all, he said as he left the room that she had better take care that he never saw her again. Outside the palace, an unremarkable carriage pulled up. The queen put on her cloak and wrapped her infant Susie in it and handed her over to a man. She hugged her, said goodbye, and left. All she could say was that the little girl could take care of herself. Just like that, Susie was sent into exile forever, and her birth father wanted to kill her just because she was a girl. Turns out he's a real bastard. A town on the outskirts of the capital. In one of the houses, the maids are discussing what they have heard. The Baron has returned with a child in his arms. He has 3 sons of his own, and now a child on the side. Who would have thought the Baron would be such a man? All men are the same. What a disgrace to the vile family. What poor girl has had such a misfortune? The Baron always seemed so loving and gentle, but in reality turned out to be just like everyone else. How sorry they are for Lady Catherine. She, too, must be grief-stricken. Baron said, "That's the way it is." His wife sighed. "It can't be helped," she said. The cruel man who read the letter. She simply had no way out. A boy ran into the room. The maids ran after him and shouted that the young master must not come in. Arnold Weil, 12 years old, second son of the Baron. As the boy ran into the room, he shouted, "Hey, what's the maid talking about? Is it true?" "Catherine, the boy's mom," she said. "Arnold, he's not a little boy anymore, is he? Why this indecent behavior?" At the boy's cries, another of the Baron's eldest sons, Morel Weil, 15 years old, came into the room. He is calm and composed. The boy said he apologizes for disturbing him, father and mother. He didn't look after him. He will take him away now. Also standing next to his older brother was the Baron's youngest son, Avery Weil, 4 years old, a little mischievous boy. Baron Weil, Stephen Weil, 50 years old. He said, "That's all right. Everybody come over here. He has something to tell you." The father explained to them that this matter concerned them too, starting today. Pointing to the baby, a small one lying in a crib, he said, "She will be your sister. This little girl will be your little sister. Her name is Susie Weil." Father went on to say that they should all get along, but Arnoldo yelled that he'd brought a bastard girl into the house and demanded that they get along. The eldest son, Morel, grabbed his middle brother Arnold to try to take him away. But the boy lashed out and shouted, "But let him go!" Pointing his finger at his father, he shouted, "How dare he do such a thing!" Old Rick disgraced their whole family. Their mother couldn't stand the whole scandal, taking the little girl in her arms. She said the matter was closed. She had already forgiven their father. Their resentment is of no use here. Well, Arnold kept breaking out of his older brother's arms and screaming that Mom, she didn't deserve to be treated like that. Let him go to his girl. Catherine couldn't stand it and yelled at her son to shut his mouth. She said the issue is closed. Susie is now a member of their family, and that's it. Arnold's older brother from the lunatics said he wasn't going to hang out with that kid. She's got rotten blood in her. The boy left the room with the crazies and didn't want to talk to anyone else. Catherine asked her eldest son, Morel, to keep an eye on Arnold to make sure he didn't do anything stupid. The eldest Morel's son replied of course he would look after it, and looked at Susie strangely. She noticed right away that he had a cold stare. It's not easy for her to get along with him. Catherine and Stefan were left in the room, The Baron came up and hugged his wife. She expressed her opinion that the similar children were not able to accept it, but the Baron said that nothing could be done. They would see that they owed a lot to that man. Susie's origin must remain a secret. Catherine asked the Baron if they really can't tell the truth to the children. When he came back today in the neighborhood already, there was talk if the children continue to believe their lies. Then with their family. Oh, well, the Baron replied that the less people know the truth, the better it will be to stick to the version that everyone has already agreed on. And that's how Susie came to the Vile family. Although her brothers are not very happy with her, the others are very kind to her. The others are the maids and governesses who looked after her, brought her up properly. They admired her. Ah, what an all-strong and healthy girl. 4 kilos and 400 grams, they said when young Mr. Avery was born. He weighed only 3 pounds. Susie thought about the fact that after all, it wasn't just one adult who remembered being an infant, and in her past life, when her mom and dad had babysat her, they had been so happy too. Everyone babysat, even Catherine, who was now considered her mom. She would come over to the crib and play with the girl, stroking her tummy. Susie, of course, was a little outraged that she was in the middle of nowhere and others were doing whatever they wanted to her. It was a bit much, though. If only she had known in her past life that her birth had brought the same happiness to those around her. Even left to her own devices, she was much happier. One day Catherine went out with the governesses from Susie's to take a walk in the garden. Catherine brought the girl in her arms, wrapped in a blanket. A governess walked beside her, carrying a stroller, and another walked behind her, carrying a huge umbrella to create shade so that Susie's eyes would not have the sun shining in them. After walking around for a bit, Susie fell asleep. Okay, in her arms, and she already wanted to put her in the stroller. Nearby, Arnold was playing ball with his dog. He threw the ball and shouted, "Fetch!" And the dog had to catch the ball and bring it back. Suddenly Arnold saw his mother walking nearby with this little brat, as he expressed himself, because he didn't like Susie at all. The boy immediately had a cunning plan in his mind. He had a ball in his hand, and he immediately imagined what he would do with it. Without thinking long, the guy threw the ball toward his mom and baby girl and yelled, "To the dog, it's fetch!" Catherine didn't expect the ball to come flying at her. She didn't have time to dodge it, and the dog jumped in. Unfortunately, she couldn't hold little Susie and dropped her on the ground. Catherine was very frightened and screamed, but Arnold's eyes also showed some fear. Just at that time, a baron was passing nearby. When he saw the whole situation, he shouted to Arnold what he had done. Everyone immediately rushed to little Susie. The baby fell on the grass and began to cry. Susie was really in pain, for she is a small child, and falling from such a height is a great trauma for her. The mother immediately lifted the child in her arms and began to soothe her, stroking her and examining her from all sides. When both the governesses and the mother looked at the girl, they all said that the head seemed to be intact, but at once began to lament that if it had suddenly broken, what a horror. Susie was also approached by the Baron. He was also very frightened. He came over and asked Susie how she had not hurt herself. By now the girl had calmed down a little. She looked at Baron and like a child said, "Aha." But overall her head seemed to be intact, only it hurt a lot. The Baron immediately called a doctor, who came and examined Susie, who said, fortunately the little girl was all right, only a few bruises. Apply the ointment he left behind more often and it will go away. After the doctor's examination, the whole family gathered around the girl's crib. Everyone was worried about what had happened. Catherine, though a little calmer after the doctor's words that everything seemed to be all right. But she was very upset with her son Arnold. She tried to explain to him that how could he do such a thing? What if something had happened to Susie or she had crashed to death? What then? What was he thinking? Maybe if they got rid of his dog, only then would it get to him. Mother kept trying to get through to him. Where had his kindness and conscience gone? She was ashamed to have a son like him. Catherine immediately gave him a house arrest sentence for the next 3 months, and he must think hard about his behavior. On top of all this, he should approach his sister and apologize. Big brother Morel put a hand on his middle brother's shoulder and said, "But he's a total baller." Arnold was somehow in no hurry to come over to the crib and apologize. Catherine yelled at him, What's he standing up there for? He has to come over here. Arnold was approached by his younger brother Avery. He tugged on his shirt sleeve and told him he was going to tell him a secret. That girl is a witch, and you can't make her mad, and he's a real jerk. What Avery said was overheard by his older brother Morel. He sat down beside the boy and asked him how he knew what he had done again. Avery was thrashing his head in different directions that he said nothing. Then Morel took him by the scruff of his neck, lifted him up and said, "He knows what punishment will follow if you use forbidden magic on common people." The younger brother twitched his arms and legs, screaming that his older brother had spared him. He'd only cast the lowest level black spells to grow fiery boils on her, but he discovered she was immune to black magic. If that doesn't prove she's a witch, he doesn't even know. Morel interjected, "Is he saying he only put the weakest of spoils on her?" Avery was teetering in his hand because the guy was holding him by the scruff of his neck and yelling, "Let him go, please!" Arnold finally gathered his courage, walking over to the girl's crib. He leaned over and looked at her. Susie looked at her brother at that moment. She remembered that moment on the street when everyone was worrying about her too much. Perhaps she was the only one who had time to notice then. The look on Arnold's face is full of fear and excitement. He didn't want to really hurt her, and with childishness, he wanted to bully the stranger he sees in her a little bit. That's all. She laughed and smiled at him like a big brother, and Arnold noticed and appreciated it. He said she smiled at him. The boy blushed. Afterward, he waved his hands in the air from the fact that he was glad that Susie smiled at him. The boy felt bad about what he had done to her. He realized his guilt. Catherine noticed that the kid didn't mean to do anything wrong. She noticed that it was only an impulsive act of a child. Wouldn't they get along now? And Catherine was very worried about how the children would get on. Since Susie couldn't tell him, well, she told him that above her nose she wasn't hurt and wasn't angry with him at all. But all the boy could hear was only baby babble in the form of, "Aha." Avery said to his brother Morel, "Look at that. My brother has already fallen under her spell. Does that look like an infant to you?" And Arnold stood admiring Susie, dancing around the crib. Morel replied that Ivory isn't exactly 4 years old either. After that incident, Arnoldo started coming over several times a day to play with Susie. When a guy came in, he always asked his mother for permission to go into Susie's room. This time Mother replied that Arnold, his sister, it was time to go to bed, and he might better go and play outside. The boy explained, but she and his father had put him under house arrest for 3 months unjustly. So he is at home, and why does she go to bed so early? Come to your sister. He said he wanted to play with her, but he saw her sleeping. Mother told him to let it be up to Arnold. She's asleep now. He can sit with her for a while. Make sure she doesn't wake up if something happens, Arnoldo replied. Yeah, and she can go and rest for a while. The mother said that she barely got the ultrasound done and asked the boy not to make too much noise. He said yes, he understood everything. Catherine left the room and went to lie down to rest for a while. She looked at her son and realized that Arnold had become more mature. She was touched. The only question in this is good or bad. When Arnold was alone with his sister, he thought nothing would happen if he touched her cheek. She's so chubby and soft, how can you resist it? Susie, when the guy touched her, turned on her side. She wanted to sleep, but Arnold couldn't sleep. He tells her to wake up. Arnold said, "Hey." Her most favored older brother came over to play with her. The guy started poking her with his finger gently to get Susie to wake up. She barely opened her eyes and said, "Aha," meaning to ask him what happened and why he woke her up. A girl dreamed she was being pecked by a whole bunch of crows, and it turned out to be her brother. Lucy started twitching her arms indignantly and saying, "Aha!" She meant for him to stop teasing her and let her sleep. But Arnold thought the girl wanted him to take her in his arms since she was twitching her little hands like that. But in Lucy's opinion, that meant he'd get out of here and let her sleep, not lie on his hands. Arnold didn't understand what Susie was trying to tell him, so he reached out his arms and took her into his arms, and the girl indignantly pointed out to him what he was doing, waving her arms and saying, "Aha!" He took it upon himself to look after her welfare. Even though she seems aloof on the inside, she actually loves him. Avery here, for example, never asked to be held by him. When Arnold picked up the girl, he realized how pretty she was, He's so pleased with the way she smells. She doesn't seem to annoy him so much. Susie was worried he wouldn't drop her. He's a little tomboy. He doesn't know how to hold a baby. She was so uncomfortable in his arms. Arnoldo, now and then, just kept going on and on about how much she loved him. The boy began to twirl around her and shout that she was Susie. Her name was Susie, right? She was so perceptive, for she was the best of all the members of the Vile family. The guy spun Susie around so much that she felt dizzy and a little carsick. Arnoldo put his arm around Susie and said, since she loved him with all her heart, he will recognize her. She was an orphan in her past life, and at first she thought her rebirth in this world was a punishment from above. But now she was of a different opinion, for now she really did have a family. For the past few months, Miss Catherine had been personally babysitting her. Susie was very warm and pleasant. Miss Catherine said that Susie was so tired that she couldn't even finish her milk. Why should she? The governess replied that she had seen young Mr. Arnold playing with the baby for a long time. That must be the reason. How nice. Susie was so anxious to tell Miss Catherine what had happened to her. She and Arnold were playing together. That boy keeps her for a toy till she dies, and she's tired, and she has no strength even to eat. But all Miss Catherine hears about the girl is goo-goo. Although Baron Weil was not particularly caring, at least he did not treat her like an infant. He allowed her to be present while he attended to his son's education. The training took place in the library. The boys sat on the floor with notebooks in their hands while the Baron taught them, Susie playing beside them. The Baron said Morel has already qualified for the Imperial School. Arnold, as for his academic progress, let's get them started today with a math test. Arnold decided something on paper at his place, and then replied to his father that option A. Oldest son Morel said Arnold is the baller. Younger son Avery replied that option C, far. Susie thought that it seemed she had an opportunity to learn more about this world. She crawled over to her brother Arnold, sat down beside him, and listened to what the Baron was saying. Baron said that if Arnoldo continued to do poorly in school, he would send him to a church school. Well, Arnoldo shouted that he would qualify for the military academy, for his goal was to become a knight. The educational model of this world is similar to the European model of the early Middle Ages. The monopoly is held by the clergy, and secular education is mainly represented by the imperial school at the royal court and the military academy for aristocrats. And general educational institutions had not yet been established. The Baron said that ever since King Jinwo took the throne in their jingling kingdom, there wasn't a single illiterate knight left. When she heard that name, she shuddered. She thought, that bastard, he's really pissing her off. Susie crawled over to her brother Arnoldo and looked in his notes with the examples. The Baron asked what the answer was in the second assignment. Arnoldo grabbed his head because he had no idea of any answer. He was weak in math. Poked her finger and said to Arnoldo, that's the right answer. AGU. AGU. Arnold said option B. The father answered it right. The boy got very excited, shouting, and what a good boy he is. And then hugged his sister and told her Susie she is his salvation. He answered it right. The girl thought that Maya's boy base was critically lacking and he should study more. He said he was a crook. Arnold was outraged. Why did he call him a crook? The angry little devil boy pointed his finger at Susie and told him she'd told him. She's a witch. Arnold was outraged and yelled at him not to talk small-tale nonsense. Baron came up to them and said he understood. No need to fight. Go do your homework with your older brother Morel. As for Avery, he went on to say that he had heard rumors that he was trying to cast a spell on his little sister. After hearing this, Susie became indignant, wondering why this weasel was trying to cast a spell on her. Could he be using magic from this world on her? Ivory sat up and started to say, curse, but he just wanted her to stop crying, that's all. And it didn't work anyway, he thinks. The point is, his powers aren't strong enough to do any damage yet. Or she's an alien. Susie started wiggling her arms and waggling, and she meant nothing of the sort. He's definitely up to something bad, and now he's talking to everyone. The girl thought he couldn't have guessed she wasn't from this world. Even if she was, she's not afraid of him. She'll show him what strength adults have. But that's not important right now. We need to figure out what kind of magic this is, after all. Apparently there's a dream sequence going on right now. Two girls are arguing with each other, and one grabs the other by the hair, shouting, "Is she being impertinent? She's going to call her big brother and he's going to give her a good thrashing." Nasty, useless crap. Okay, she can get her brother to help her. Oh, right. Where does a worthless orphan girl get brothers? The girl getting her hair pulled, that was Susie. But who says our Susie doesn't have brothers? The brothers are here. Three young and tall guys are old enough to be heading in Susie's direction. Arnoldo walked over, took the girl's hand and told her that her most favorite brother had arrived. The boy asked if she was okay and smiled back at her. Suddenly Susie woke up. She realized that it was only a dream, but it was so pleasant. While she does have three older brothers now, it's still hard to believe, of course. She was already wondering, would they really be so cool when they grew up? Arnoldo from the dream had been so kind and gentle to her. If the current one wised up a little, he would be quite bearable. Susie woke up finally, because she was having thoughts in her head. She sat up on the bed and thought about the fact that nothing was clear with Morel yet, and Devil Avery was certainly not going to be a good brother to her. Used magic on her. Now let her walk and look around. Catherine's mom walked into the room. She said, "Oh, Susie, already awake. Now they're going to go wash up, put on a pretty dress, and go for a walk." At the manor, the maids, while cleaning, struck up a conversation, saying that Mistress Catherine was going into town today to do some shopping. Yes, Mistress said she would be in town for a week. One of the maids marveled that she was so jealous. I wonder who has the honor of escorting her this time. Mistress is overly generous with those who go to the city with her. One can only receive so many gifts. She is so eager to go. One of the girls said that she would take little Susie with her this time. Mistress is so kind-hearted to this little girl as if she were her own daughter. But Susie's a real sweetheart too, not a baby. No crying or nagging at all. Mistress Catherine put a gorgeous, beautiful costume on Susie and asked, "Well, how does she like it?" Susie was no longer happy. This is the 100th time these women have been stressed. These women to stress. Her into every possible dress has no limits. Arnoldo ran into the room saying, "Mother, does Susie really need to go away with her? Perhaps he could join them." Catherine explained that she was going to buy things for the girls, and would he be interested in them? Besides, his father was going to town too. He could join him with his older brother. Arnoldo was indignant, but then he and Susie wouldn't see each other for ages. She would cry if he wasn't there. His mother told him that she was able to handle her. Therefore, it was better for him to be with his father. Catherine finally made it out of the house with Susie. She carried the baby in her arms as she walked through the city streets. Her mother explained to Susie that walking in the fresh air was the best thing for babies, much better than staying at home. Fidelity to the ultrasound, at least here. Arnoldo wouldn't bother her, and she'd get some rest. At this moment, as Catherine strolled through the streets, Susie looked around and marveled. So this is what a city looks like in this world, so lively. Susie noticed that there were many strong stone houses, similar in style to the Croatian city of Dubrovnik. The Tower of Celestials is heard from everywhere. The priests of this world believe in the existence of gods. Besides, it comes out that it was the gods who endowed humans with the powers of sorcery. Susie was very curious about what this magic was all about. Did everyone have this kind of power? As they walked down the street near the stores, Catherine said that this was Arnold's favorite candy store. She suggested they go in and buy some sweets for everyone, and maybe Susie would like it. When Catherine entered the store with her baby in her arms, the store, like many other stores, had tables with chairs where people could sit down and immediately enjoy a cup of coffee and a delicious piece of cake. Just at that moment, at one of the tables sat a trio of girls who saw Catherine entering the store with a baby in her arms. One of the girls exclaimed, "Is it Lady Catherine herself?" "Let's see, and she's got the kid everyone's talking about." The girl was very modest, so much so that even Susie heard her. She thought, so something gave her a bad feeling. Naturally, the girls, seeing Catherine, invited her to sit down at the table. One of them said, "Catherine, what an unexpected meeting, considering the recent events regarding your family." It seemed that none of them would have dared to show their faces in public. This sarcastic girl went on to further outrageously say that Baron Weil had indeed gone too far. He still hadn't revealed who he was having an affair with on the side. He's probably trying to protect his mistress, with no thought at all for Catherine's feelings. Susie noticed that behind the sympathetic smile she was hiding her sneer. That's the lady. Another girl also decided to speak up in terms of how hard it must be for her right now. There was a note of sympathy in her voice, of course, but her gaze was terribly indifferent, not a hint of sympathy. Lady Catherine laughed and said, "It's nothing." She thought, "She's lucky to be in this coffee shop." This is still nothing. But when they began to whisper among themselves in front of Catherine that it turns out that not everyone knows that the child is from a mistress, and some cannot even imagine how a man could do this. What a misfortune. Lady Catherine sat blushing and didn't know what to say to her. Susie realized that these women were hurting her. No matter what the world, no matter what age or social status, the strong always hurt and insult the weak. The girl said that at least this girl would not claim the inheritance. But if she continued to let the Baron get away with this, it would be more than one bastard. It was the same girl who had suggested that Catherine make arrangements with the abbot and send. After hearing the words, Susie decided to act and slightly coughed to the point where some of the food flew out right onto this girl who was talking a lot. Susie looked at her and said, "How come?" The girl was sitting up at that moment. Catherine looked at the girl and asked if she was okay. She must have choked, and the rest. She said that it was not proper for a gentleman to discuss things in front of a small child. She wanted so badly to be able to say the word mommy further. Of course, she said ahoo, but what she meant was that it came out accidentally. She didn't mean it. Catherine was very excited. She said that Susie had called her mommy. She repeated it several times and then cried with joy. All I could do was say mommy one more time and kiss her on the cheek. The girls at the table, of course they came. They didn't expect a kid to do that. Mila laughed and said that it was the little girl who was so attached to her. When she sees her, she stops crying and whimpering, even if they are not related to each other. But she has become more dear to her than all her relatives. So ladies, don't take it too hard. There are times when a loving child can be more important than any situation in life. You agree with her, don't you? Catherine asked the others. Catherine looked at Susie with loving motherly eyes and stroked her head, one of the girls said. But of course he's of the same opinion. Her sons are now in the care of her husband's parents. The girl who started this whole insulting conversation said they would drop the subject, and she completely forgot to introduce them. It's Lady Lucia. Unfortunately, now she has almost no opportunity to leave the royal palace. The queen herself had chosen her elder sister to be the little prince's maid, so she was now devoting all her time to taking care of His Majesty's favorite. When she heard that, she thought it was the little Prince Xiaoban. I said it's all thanks to His Majesty. But it's not easy for her sister either. They say that the prince's former maid was executed for unknown reasons, and the Danes don't change their palace maids every 6 months. One of the girls laughed and said, "But that's okay. The important thing is that her sister is now making a fortune." While the 3 girls were gossiping amongst themselves, Susie thought that this was what the book said. In order to avoid leaking information about Xiaoban's true origin, his father was extremely strict with the servants in the palace. Everything here concluded that so far everything that is happening is completely in line with the content of the Jingling Kingdom story. Also, it was mentioned in the book that the whole Vile family treated Susie perfectly. Susie spent her short but peaceful childhood with them. Unfortunately, she grew up to be a mediocre person who could do nothing. After Ji Nuo and Xiaoban found out her whereabouts, her life became a nightmare from which she could never escape. She would become a pathetic puppet for the rest of her life. So Susie thought, but no way. Now that her life is her own, there's no way she's going to accept her fate. But how she can avoid the same fate as Susie in the book, she knows too little about. So the girl desperately decided to fight for her destiny. She realized that she needed more knowledge, and perhaps she should start with the knowledge of magic. She had a swell opportunity when Mother Catherine went to the bookstore because Arnaldo needed a lot of books. Is he even capable of reading that many? The woman thought. That's where the ultrasound thought of picking up the right book on the shelf while her mother stood looking at them. Surprisingly, she looked at one of the books and began to point her finger so that Catherine paid attention to it. And then she reached for it. The girl tried to give her mother all sorts of signs, because she couldn't tell, but she was reaching for the right book. Otherwise, she wouldn't get it at all. But happily, Catherine noticed the child reaching for one of the books on the shelf. She picked it up and held it up to her and asked, "Does she really like this book?" How can a child like a book if she doesn't even know the letters? Susie hugged the book and was very happy. She started to burst into childish laughter to show that she liked the book very much, and her mother to buy it too. Now she's going to start learning magic. Big Catherine was so delighted that the child was fond of books that when she came home she told the maids. And they decided to check something out, piling a bunch of different toys, jewelry in front of her, and put a book, a dress, there was candy, all put in one pile and put Susie in the middle. Catherine said, "Look!" Mother turned to Susie, asking her what her favorite toy was. The maid standing nearby also called out, "Which toy will you choose?" But only Susie didn't need any toys or jewelry or anything at all. She pulled herself up for that magic book because she needs to do her studying. And Mother Catherine laughed and said, "She told you. Susie likes that book best of all, just as she thought she would. She doesn't want anything else. She couldn't settle down in the store until she bought her one." The maids and governesses who had gathered around thought it was incredible. Could the goddess of wisdom herself have come down to earth in the form of this little girl? When Susie opened this book and sat down, she noticed that the writing in this world was very different from the writing used where she had lived before. But that didn't bother her. It seemed that by coming here, she had gained the ability to understand everything written here. That's so cool. So, what did Susie read? That there are two versions of the origin of magic on the continent. One believes that the gods, when they created this world, spread their power throughout the earth, and that the spell is a kind of password to unlock those powers. People with a certain body constitution are able to unleash various divine powers endlessly through these spells. Others tend to believe that the world created by the gods is full of different elements, and spells, in turn, are able to place these elements in a certain order. And people born with a certain body structure have enough power to resonate with the elements through spells. So, in a word, that's how magic is born. Susie realized that, in short, to master magic, you have to learn spells. And they should definitely be taught from simple to complex, starting with the rigors of elementary spells. While Susie was trying to read a book, a maid came up to her. She took a toy and started saying, "Baby, look what she has," and started flashing that toy in front of her nose. They say it's cute. Do they really like it? Judging by the realization, the biggest disadvantage of being a small child is that an adult will never leave him alone. How noisy it is, impossible to concentrate. Susie saw Morel sitting by the window reading a book. He sat quietly and calmly. No one disturbed him. Susie thought that no living soul in this house would dare disturb Morel. The beauty of being a grown man. Dining room, it's dinner time. The whole family has gathered to eat together. Susie's mom, Catherine, says she can't figure out why Susie hasn't been able to sleep lately. She reads this book all the time, and how can such a small child understand what it says? Across from Susie sat Avery. The boy looked at her and muttered to himself that he told you she was a witch. She's only pretending to be normal. The Baron, cutting a piece of meat, said that the child was growing up. That was normal. In a little while she'll be old enough to sit at the table on her own and eat dinner with them. He can't wait for that to happen. Suddenly the lights went out in the great hall and everyone was left sitting in the dark. Arnold shouted what was happening and it wasn't ghosts. Mother told Arnold that it was just a short circuit. He should calm down. He would scare his sister with his screaming. Mother turned to Susie and told her not to be afraid. It was all right. The light would be back soon. Avery told Arnold, but he's a coward too. Arnold shouted at him what he said and showed his fist. Baron asked everyone to calm down and said that there will be no electricity for a while. Let's light candles for now. Catherine stroked Susie's head so the baby wouldn't worry. Susie thought, so there is electricity in this world. The surprise was probably only for Susie, because the others all knew that Morel had magical powers. The guy was able to summon fire from his hand. The guy who swung his hand turned that fire into a beautiful firebird. Having flown all over the room, this bird with its wings lit all the candles in the room. After that, Susie realized that she should spend more time with Morel. Then she would be able to understand the essence of magic faster. She crawled to him every day, knocking on his door, except that her older brother didn't want to notice her. He kept bringing the baby to his mother and scolding her for bringing Susie to him. She crawled to him every day and stopped him from reading. Catherine took the baby in her arms and said Susie just likes him. That's where she's going with him. Well, the guy said she was distracting him and kept leaving. Didn't want to sit with Susie. That's how the world presented her with her first hard-to-solve problem. Morel. No matter how hard she tries, he remains completely indifferent to her. 15-year-old Morel is the very definition of a studious student. Simply put, he's an asshole. Since Jingling has not yet introduced general education, he stands out for his intelligence and ability. At the age of 1, he was chosen as the king's sage, and as an exception, he was enrolled in the imperial school instead of attending the royal family's school. A young man with a cold temperament, uninterested in anything but his studies. Arnold stood outside the imperial school with Susie in his arms and resented why he personally had to come here when his brother needed something. The boy looked around and realized that this place was really cool. Susie wondered how she was going to solve the problem with Morel. Morel finally came out. Arnoldo said, "Here comes Big Brother." There were girls walking around Morel and chirping something to him. The boy didn't look very happy. Morel approached Arnoldo and Susie. A girl came up with him and asked Morel, "Let's go out to dinner later." It was an interesting incident. Morel picked up Susie and put her in his arms. He said, "Excuse me, he had to look after his sister." The girl replied sadly, "Okay, next time then they won't go." Both Susie and Arnoldo heard this. Arnoldo asked his older brother why he had lied. Morel said that she was the Duke's daughter and no one could afford to insult her. The title of Baron is the lowest in the hierarchy, and Morel is the son of a Baron. The older brother looked at his youngest sister and said, "Who would have thought this prop would be so useful?" Susie was concerned. What on earth had he come up with? And what he came up with was this: a classroom at the Imperial School. Morel just took Susie to class with him. Susie was eager to attend the lessons so that she could learn something. Just now the teacher was telling her how to create a fireball. Susie immediately pulled the pacifier out of her mouth to listen attentively. The teacher said, taking the magic wand, "First, assess the composition of the elements in your surroundings, the difference in humidity and temperature. Even gather the element of fire around your palms. Keep in mind that spells may vary. If you want to master high-level spells, you need to systematically study various disciplines, namely chemistry, physics, math, and history. Also, let's not forget the other subjects." Susie had tried to win Morel's affection, but all in vain, and now success has come to her by accident. Morel went everywhere with his sister, and when people approached him, even in the library, he would always say, "Excuse me, he has to look after his sister." Morel was approached by girls at the gym, and he also said he apologized. He needed to look after his sister. And then Morel just got used to it, and even on a day off, when they went for a walk as a family, he carried the baby in his arms. Arnoldo tried to say that he should be the one to carry Susie. She loves him more than anyone. But Morel replied, "Really?" She told him so. After these words, Arnold always got angry and said he was a bad big brother. That's how a new page of Susie's integration in this world began. 5 years later, her father writes a letter to Susie's birth mother. The letter says that Her Majesty's beneficent little princess is well. She is intelligent, inquisitive, and kind. Everyone who meets her praises her. She likes to read quietly next to Morel. She also likes to play outdoors with Arnoldo, so young and active. She is indeed a fairy sent to them by the gods. Thinks that's why she inherited her great blood. Your Majesty, hope she can be reunited with you soon." When the letter was finished, the Baron asked his wife to give this to the secret messenger. He said he was afraid that this last letter to her there would save them the trouble of dropping off letters. "Hey!" Catherine, looking out the window and seeing Susie playing there, said, There is no need to worry as long as she is all right. Though, mother, she will be at ease. And outside, Susie gathered all her maids around her. They praised her, saying that little miss, they wanted to hear her again. Little miss has the best stories. Then Susie would stand in the middle of the circle and tell them what to tell them this time. Not the prince and princess, a change of characters. She didn't expect fairy tales to be so popular here at all. 5 years passed unnoticed. The book said it was important to win people's hearts and make connections. This time she wouldn't be the helpless Susie who was being bullied. Smiling at her maids, she began to tell the tale that once upon a time, there was a little girl. Everyone loved her and called her Little Red Riding Hood. So one day, Little Red Riding Hood went into the woods to take food to her grandmother. While Susie was telling the story, Catherine and Stefan, her parents, were watching her. The Baron remarked that Susie was an unusual child. Catherine laughed and said, "Yes, she is a very intelligent and caring girl for her 5 years, a child with the behavior of an adult." The Baron emphasized that it might even be a bad thing. If being prominent in their country, she might be chosen by someone in the royal family or ministers. He fears that her real mother would want Susie to live in peace and safety rather than be at court. Besides, her identity must remain secret. There was a knock and Morel came into the room saying, "Mother and father, he would like to speak to you." People for over 5 years, when he and his brothers were 3 years old, their mother had already hired their first teacher. Whatever direction they choose, it is important to learn the basics. The boy said that he spends most of his time at school, so he can't teach Susie all the time. He doesn't understand what they are trying to accomplish with his parents. Morel went on to explain to them that Susie was very clever and was afraid she was even cleverer than he was at that age. If she gets a good education, in the future surely all people will pay attention to her. Catherine thought that was what bothered them the most. She said she wanted Susie to always be in her care. Morel asked why the mothers wanted it so much. Don't they want their sons and daughters to achieve fame and success? The Baron replied that the girl was too young. Too early to worry about that. The maids, who were not far from the Baron's study, heard their argument. They began to whisper and resent that the Baron was quarreling with young Mr. Morel. One knows why. One of the girls said what she heard was because of Miss Susie. The 2 maids stepped aside and began to whisper that Mr. Morel was always indifferent. But I didn't think he would cross the Baron because of young Mistress Susie. The youngest brother, Avery, was standing nearby, eavesdropping on the conversation. Why could you hear them arguing? Because Morel hadn't closed the door and there was a gap. He went to the door and he could hear everything. He began to eavesdrop. The Baron said not another word. There was no time to discuss the matter. He had already said that the girl was too young. But Morel cried out that he really didn't understand. Is she being treated individually because others say she is an illegitimate daughter? Catherine shouted, "Morel, stop it!" The boy jumped out the door with anger and shouted that it wasn't fair. Standing in the doorway was his younger brother, Avery. He tried to appeal to him, but he wouldn't listen to anyone. He jumped out and went to his room. Avery didn't understand why his older brother cared so much for little this witch. The boy began to think about how his mother and brothers used to love him very much. Mother always said, Avery, their little brother, they, as older brothers, should take care of him, and they did. It also happened to Susie when her mom said that she's still little, they should take good care of her. And after that, everything changed for Avery. He came to see his mom many times, but she said, Avery, she's very busy right now. If he's hungry, he can go to the cook and eat on his own. Everyone was always going on about this illegitimate girl. Even when Avery approached his older brother Morel and asked him to take him to school, his brother said, no strangers allowed in the school. Although he did take Susie with him, he didn't understand why she had it all. Though the girl tried to befriend him by coming to him and saying, Avery, let's play, he answered her very angrily that he would never accept her. Susie realized that it was impossible to like all people. Avery doesn't like her because of Morel in the house. Only he didn't accept her as an illegitimate daughter. Arnold's room. Susie and Arnaldo are sitting studying at the table. The guy says, But why do they assign homework? His best years are passing. We have to find a way to go out and play. Not very good at school, Arnaldo. He's crying. Susie had very different thoughts. She understood that Morel wanted her to have the same elementary education as her older brothers. However, Stefan and Catherine are not very keen to approve of that. Stefan must be worried that if she agrees, she'll get too good an education. If, like Morel, someone at the palace likes her, the secret of her identity might be revealed. In the history books, it was said that she died because her personality was revealed. But if she doesn't get an education, she will be just an ordinary weak person. It turns out that she can only accept her fate. She knew both of their positions were correct, but she couldn't let them fight over her. Susie closed her books and was about to leave when Arnold asked what had happened to her, why she was suddenly up. The girl said she would go to her brother Morel. She needed to talk to him, after which she would return. Arnold shouted with tears in his eyes that she didn't like it with him anymore. The boy got upset, started crying, and said, "Does she think he's stupid because he can't do his homework, so she doesn't like him anymore?" That's right. Morel's room. Susie went to her brother's room to talk to him after all. The girl explained to her brother that this was not allowed. But Morel asked, why doesn't she want to learn already? Or does she think she can learn everything on her own? Or she just doesn't like the fact that he had a fight with his father. She's heard that because she's an illegitimate daughter, she's being treated individually, and she wants to confirm other people's guesses. After all, it's an embarrassment to their family. Susie said she doesn't care what other people say. She knows that her parents and brothers love her very much, and that is enough for her. Arnold said that he loved her very much too. Afterwards, he approached the girl and asked her not to worry from now on. He will not quarrel with her parents. Susie looked at the gate and said that he promises. The guy smiled and said he promises, but she needs to wait a little longer. He has a plan. A little later, Susie is walking down the corridor and hears the maids talking among themselves that a foreign guest has arrived at the manor, all asking who he is and if he has arrived directly. One of the maids tells the lady and Susie that the Baron and Madame said it was a dear guest and he should be in the parlor now. All at once she heads for the living room. Running up to the door, she sees that there is indeed a certain unfamiliar man sitting there. A stranger, or rather a foreign guest, starts the conversation first. He says that Morel is, as always, excellent. This time he is here mainly because of his future development, which he wants to discuss with his parents. The foreign visitor begins to tell that he has lately asked His Majesty the King to enlarge the educational institutions of their country. Thus, a proposal for enlightenment was prepared. But one law is not enough without good manpower. It is useless. This country urgently needs perfectly trained people. A foreign visitor says they are thinking of Morel going into the education field in the future. Guest explained that as far as he knows, Morel plans to continue his studies. He hopes that he will pass his exam and then work in the education field afterward. But Morel believes that his plans both have to be approved by his parents. The foreign visitor's name is Dr. David, Ph.D. He tried very hard to tell the best things about Morel. The parents looked at each other and said what a great thing for their family. It is a great honor to be recognized by David. They didn't notice Susie standing by the door, eavesdropping on the conversation. One of the maids stepped over her and dropped a tray of fruit. There was a very loud crash, and all the fruit fell to the floor and rolled around. Susie was very frightened. She said, "I'm sorry, she didn't mean it." At that moment, Morel saw her. He said, "Susie, come in." The girl was uncomfortable after the incident. She stood in the door and did not know what to do, whether to go in or not. Morel said it was his little sister he was telling him about. Her name is Susie Weil. David smiled and said, "Who would have thought that cold and indifferent Morel would have a little sister that he loves so much?" The guy immediately got shy and started saying that it was not that I love, more like mutual respect. David said that his evaluation of this girl was different than usual. Morel explained that after a while the teacher will also evaluate her. Morel turned to Susie to say hello to her older brother's teacher, Dr. David. Big brother's teacher is a famous scientist. Susie immediately remembered that Dr. David is the person who was mentioned in the history book. He is a famous teacher, a pioneer, a favorite of King Jinuo. Even the Baron said to Susie, "Hurry up and say hello." Although he thought Morel wanted to gain Dr. David's favor towards Susie, Susie and the Baron thought, if she entered the royal school, Susie's identity would be in danger. Susie herself thought that Stefan and Catherine would be worried about her. So the Baron decided she couldn't be allowed to show herself too well. And Susie thought it was impossible to arouse his interest. She apologized to Morel in advance, but she didn't say it to him, and ran to hide behind his leg. The boy didn't realize what was wrong. He thought there was a Baron sitting next to him who stroked Susie's head and said to her, "Susie, what's wrong? Hurry up and say hello. Come on." Baron looks at the child who says nothing. He realized that she was reacting, just as he wanted her to. Could she really see right through him? Susie looked at this scientist and realized that the fear of scientists in the eyes of adults is an ordinary scientist who does not leave a bad impression. David said it's okay, it's a child after all, no need to force her. But Morel kept thinking that something was wrong. He grabbed his sister, picked her up, started shaking her and said, "Susie, listen carefully, but she can name the decimal point and the number of pi." But Susie looked at her brother and said, "Uva." He put her on the floor and said she wasn't his sister, he wanted his Susie. "Bring her back." After which the girl ran to her mom screaming, "Uva, mommy!" David looked at all this and thought she had met the famous one. Looks like Morel overestimated his sister. That's for sure. A little later in the dining room, when the critical moment had passed, Susie thought that Dr. David wasn't interested in her. And thank goodness Stefan and Catherine breathed a sigh of relief. The girl was sad because they had just talked about Her Majesty, the biological mother of this body. She hadn't seen her again since she was born. Catherine clapped her hands and said Susie was a good girl, a bright head and golden hands. But Susie thought it wouldn't hurt to sneak a peek. With only the men left in the room, Morel says, "His Majesty Jinuo is a great strategist. All these years, he has suppressed the chaos in the southwest and the Linbei Peninsula. Soon the rest of the Lin and Lin clans will be back in control of their country." Our Morel went on to say that he was the greatest ruler in the history of their state. David smiled and replied, "His Majesty is invincible in wars. He only needs to placate Her Majesty to stabilize the world. Queen Alida, who comes from a noble family, is gentle, kind. She is a blessing to their state." Susie comes into the room and says that she heard the famous poet Hyde write a praiseful verse about a graceful flower that will never wither nor die, for its summer will never end. At this point, the girl realizes that she has unknowingly quoted a poem about Her Majesty from a history book. This is no good. David clapped his hands and said, "Not bad. How did she know that poem?" Girl, and Morel thought too, how did Susie know that poem? For he had never talked to her about it. Susie thought it could not be helped, and said she had heard people say that Her Majesty was the kindest and gentlest in the world. There is a bard at the manor, and he recited the verse, and she learned it. David reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a letter. He said that it looked like he had found the right candidate. Her Majesty of Goodness. Every year she organizes a palace banquet in the capital and invites people of different estates to attend. Since Her Majesty has a respect for educated people, this is a great chance to get the bright sovereigns to really notice her. David went on to explain that if Her Majesty knew that a 5-year-old child knew by heart a verse praising her, she would be very pleased. She kept holding the envelope and looking at her father, Stefan. She asked him if she could take the invitation. The Baron immediately thought about it. Allowing Susie to participate in the palace banquet is quite risky. But it's Her Majesty's banquet. It's been 5 whole years since the Queen has seen Susie. This is an opportune moment for them to meet. It probably won't be possible later. The Baron smiled and said, "Thank you, Dr. David. We are honored." Then David smiled back and said, "Prepare yourself carefully before meeting Her Majesty."